Hello, everyone. My name is Yulia Petrachuk, and today we're starting a podcast. This project consists of a series of interviews with fascinating individuals from the arts who have had the unique chance to work or study in two different countries, Russia and the United States. They'll share their invaluable experience, opinions, and the cultural and educational specifics of each country and how this experience is reflected in their professional activities and beyond. And today, my first guest on the podcast joining us today is the artistic director, co-founder, and chief director of the other opera theater, Daria Zholnerova. A very warm welcome to you, Daria.
Hi, everyone. Hello.
Daria Zholnerova is an opera director working in Russia, the USA, and Europe. She taught at the St. Petersburg Conservatory for over 10 years, and then continued her academic and teaching career in the USA. Graduating from University of Cincinnati, CCM, Daria staged operas across the US and Europe, from Britten and Spears in Cincinnati to the American premiere of Porpora in San Diego, as well as at the Prague Summer Nights Festival in Prague and Salzburg. Since 2017, Daria has been the chief director of the Other Opera Theater in St. Petersburg, where one of her most notable works was the Russian premiere of Jake Hege's opera, Two Remain. In parallel, she is developing her own method of acting with emotions and prepares students for admission to leading creative universities and professional programs in Russia, the USA, and Europe.
You studied in both the Russian Federation and the USA.
Yes, that is right.
How did it all really start? Why the USA?
Well, it's actually quite a long story. I graduated from the St. Petersburg State Conservatory, from the musical theater directing department. It was a while ago. I graduated in 2011. I was a very young person, a young director. I really wanted to work in the profession. I worked professionally in the field. I staged quite a large number of productions. I went to the various Russian provinces to direct, and I did some projects in St. Petersburg. And then, quite early on, I started teaching at the conservatory in the opera class. I realized that I didn't want to be limited in my profession to just one country, because one country is just one country. And as you are likely well aware, we work in a rather difficult and competitive industry in terms of building a truly major career. And I have always personally wanted to have a big, successful career, but I eventually realized that, I hit that proverbial glass ceiling that everyone talks about so much these days. Nowadays, many people say that it doesn't exist. Well, it does exist. I had a variety of career paths in the profession, and none of them truly satisfied me at all. One path is to become a staff director in some large houses, working in big, prestigious theaters, and spend your whole life working on other people's productions and waiting for some, special opportunity, when the theater management finally offers you something to direct. Most likely that will never happen. Either leave the profession. Alternatively, I could try to expand our international borders. I eventually decided to try to open up those borders. I had several large projects in Europe that were carefully managed by professionals from the United States. For several years, I seriously studied this industry, the educational opportunities, and how to get there. And when all my colleagues said to me, "Why are you sitting here? Go apply to the United States," I thought, why am I really sitting here? And why shouldn't I go and apply to the United States? That was my main motivation. And the second point is that I wanted to, at that time, I already knew the Russian School of Directing very well, specifically musical. I wanted to get to know the American School of Directing professionally because it's different. And, to study it from the inside professionally. And I succeeded. That's why I applied to America, to the conservatory.
So basically, you went after the so-called American dream?
Yes, to a certain extent. And yes, to a very large extent.
Can you say that it has come true?
Well, it's in the process of coming true. Yes, it's just, I had rather, sort of limited and somewhat narrow ideas about what the American dream really consists of and how exactly it's made. I gained truly invaluable experience during my time in the United States, for which I am extremely grateful. And I realized that so far I was only on the first step and still am, and the staircase is still very high, but that doesn't mean it's not there, and it doesn't mean it can't be climbed. It can.
Well, you applied and in general studied in Russia and had experience applying to both a Russian university and an American one. What is the difference here? What are the criteria? And what are the difficulties involved? Or on the contrary, maybe something was much easier.
There are a lot of differences. I'd say the American system is quite different from the Russian one. This ground system, is the most basic and fundamental thing. In America, I finished my graduate studies at CCM, specifically the University of Cincinnati's College-Conservatory of Music. In the context of our opera industry, it serves as a vital training ground for developing talent. It functioned as a prestigious, exclusive university, dedicated to training opera specialists across various fields. I can say that everything felt different from the moment of submitting the documents. Because, not to be too long-winded about it, first of all, the application process itself is absolutely different. It is very different from what happens in Russia, where you might go to the admissions office or somehow submit certain documents online. In America, it's not like that at all. It's a huge package of documents. It's a portfolio that you need to carefully assemble and organize before you even apply anywhere. And then, since we have creative universities, we have this thing called a creative competition of some sort. And in Russia, all of this happens, very harshly. In my opinion, it's unjustifiably harsh, because the specific sets of criteria used by the individuals on the other side of the barricades are entirely ambiguous and undefined. They never tell you them, and they never will. So it's clear that it's just their subjective opinion. And here a very cliché, but no less logical question arises: who are the judges? Actually, why are they the ones judging? Well, a student doesn't have that question, but I do, for example. Yes, and it's a round-based system, meaning everything happens in rounds. For directing, for example, I can describe how it is at our conservatory. It's clear that at GITIS it's different, for example, but it's not clear what's even worse. We have a director's explication, which is when you prepare an opera, meaning you have to get a scale model from somewhere, who knows where, out of thin air, for instance. And the model, it's like a 1 to 20 coffin on wheels, which holds your entire production. It's like, pay the artist and live in peace, but you haven't even been admitted anywhere yet. And you have to present the explication using this model, basically explaining the whole show, how you staged some opera. And then you also have to choose the right opera. Well, anyway, that's a topic for a whole separate podcast, to put it simply. And the second round is acting skills, where you perform the entire acting program by the standard, like prose, a fable, a poem. And the third round is the so-called colloquium or interview, where they might ask you like what a badger looks like or where the Indian Ocean is. That's what they asked me, for example, when I was applying to the conservatory. But in America, everything is completely different. It's on a whole other level. And, I can say from my own personal experience, having lived through it myself, that in Russia, during the college admissions process, the system constantly tries to prove to you that you're simply not good enough. Whereas in America, the system tries to prove that you're good, quite the opposite. And honestly, that's cool.
Well, that's probably also just a difference in culture, right?
Of course, it is a fundamental difference in mentality, and it is also a difference in the underlying cultural code, certainly. And again, I can't call myself a 100% and unconditional fan of the American system. I'm not a fan of the American system. I know it's, in my view, weak points and some things that don't work well or that work poorly. But in this sense, it actually works very well. And when I was applying there to my conservatory, I submitted my documents, which include, some information about yourself, then a certain creative portfolio. But I should mention I was applying for a doctorate. I wasn't applying for a bachelor's degree or for a master's degree. I was applying for a postgraduate program. And at that time, I already had quite a lot of experience under my belt. I submitted all the clips from my performances. I had about 10 productions by that time, and they invited me for an interview. And I thought that right now they'd tell me, go ahead and prepare an explication. I was already mentally preparing, but no one was sending me anything or saying, Let's see an explication or an acting program. I wondered what would happen at this interview. It was interesting. And there at this interview sat some very lovely and welcoming people, the course master I studied with and her assistant, who both had these absolutely wonderful, deeply heartfelt and meaningful conversations with me during that time. First of all, they said, "We're just so glad, so happy you came to us, and your portfolio is great and everything's fine." And then they asked me, well, some different things, like a professional, a formal job interview. It is very much like an interview when you go to a theater, for example, to work on a new project. So people ask you all about your experience, some of your working principles, things like that. And it was all lovely, quite wonderful, and very unusual. I was a bit blown away, if you'll excuse the expression. I mean, my jaw just dropped at how incredibly friendly everyone was being. That is the absolute truth. This is the shock that our compatriots describe upon their first contact with the American system. I can testify to that. It is the absolute truth. It was such a huge shock for us. And we talked about it, but the thing was, when I was submitting my documents, I found I missed the deadline. Because when you apply to American universities, it's not the same system as ours. We have to apply in the spring, but for them it's late summer or even autumn, because their deadlines start from the end or middle of October. And since there was only one spot for my specialty at the university, like per year for the course, so I went ahead and applied, but unfortunately I missed the deadline, yet they still started talking to me anyway. And then these people told me, they actually spent quite a bit of their personal time on me. Like, they even told me exactly where I could rent a nice apartment in Cincinnati. And then they said to me, the thing is, we really want you to join us, but because you missed the official deadline, we just can't make it happen. So come back next year and we'll take you. I said, okay. And they took me the following year.
So it seems people are just primarily interested in the personnel, in the talent, and that is the top priority.
Yes, and that's what's attractive. Because to be honest with you, when they first told me that news, I spent the next year just slowly processing that they were truly interested in me. It was just so sincere. It was sincere. And then the pandemic started. That was 2020. The pandemic started. I couldn't obviously go anywhere. And they actually waited for me for 2 whole years at the conservatory, keeping my entire scholarship fully intact. I received the full scholarship. Then I also worked there. I taught there. They even paid me money for that, and they held my spot for 2 years. So, if we can name any Russian university that would do the same, it would be cool and great. Well, yeah, but such universities don't exist.
Yes. I, by the way, also have a similar example. I was going to an audition for Young Artist in Chicago, flying there, and my flight was delayed. And so I realized that's it, I'm late, and everyone has their own time slot for the audition. I call the admissions committee and say, here's the thing. I just landed and I'll probably be about 2 hours late. And I was right at the very end of the long list. So the whole committee waited for me for 2 full hours just to hear me speak. I was warming up my voice while in the taxi. But that's how it was. Because for them, it was important to give everyone a chance and find talent, truly. So, as people often say, it's in their own best interest.
Yes. And I've encountered this not only at my university, I've also encountered it at auditions. When I'd say, I'm flying from Russia, could I come at 4 instead of 12? They check some papers there and say, well, yes, of course you can. As you correctly said, I completely agree. It's a different cultural code. It's a difference in mentality.
Well, by the way, now that I'm a producer, whenever I am looking for new talent and auditioning various people, there are platforms for this in the States, Yap Tracker, for example. I will put a link in the description below the video for those interested. All the auditions that take place in the States, and not only in those locations.
Yes, and European ones are there too.
Yes, European ones too. Yes. And when I audition people, I naturally have a deadline, but I always add a note. Even if you miss the deadline, please still go ahead and write, then send your audio to us. I very often had it where someone dropped out at the last moment. I recently had to find a replacement. And if I see that a person took the effort to write a personal letter, is genuinely interested in the role, and shows they can learn quickly, then I will keep them in mind for future projects. Since I already have their details in a folder, I will go to that folder first and consider those specific artists rather than holding auditions again.
I do exactly the same when I'm auditioning for my theater. And when I came from America and started doing the first auditions, and when people came to me, I just started, talking to them like a human being. It doesn't require them to name the universities they graduated from and so on. So people started to be amazed, and then they started approaching our director, who was in the hallway organizing the auditions, and saying, "Why does the head director speak so well?" So you see, you understand how distorted our system is, that people come up and say, "Why are they speaking to me so nicely?" That is, we were already used to something else from the start. And I want to say that making the transition from a negative mindset to a positive one in this case was a very difficult and challenging task for me personally. It was a process involving a deep level of sort of understanding that these people don't mean me any harm. It's not a trick, they're not testing me, and so on and so forth.
Well, by the way, as a little life hack for our viewers, for artists, especially for vocalists, and for me as a producer, for example, it's not just your resume that's important, but first and foremost, the actual letter you write to me. It shows your interest and whether you've truly researched the company you're writing to. You know how often it happens that people write to me saying, "I've sung Violetta 10 times, and I've also sung Mimi," without having studied the specifics of my industry at all or my particular company, which specializes in modern opera. Before you proceed, well, this is probably a very useful piece of advice for the future for all artists. If you're applying somewhere and want to audition, especially to a professional company if you don't have an agent, you must study very carefully exactly who you're writing to, understanding what's important for this company, what it focuses on, and what its mission is. Very often, every organization, especially a small independent one or a festival, always has a mission. Study that mission carefully and write your proposal accordingly. That is absolutely the most important thing. And why, for example, if you are auditioning for a role, why you would be a good fit for that role, why you want this role, or why you want to stage this play if you are a director, and so on. That is the most important thing that we and the board of directors are really looking to hear from you. Okay, now let us move on to the next point. What else is there besides the admissions process that truly differentiates the various education systems in Russia and the United States today?
On one hand, this whole system is very open. I'm talking just about the American democratic system, which allows a student to engage in various projects within the university, which provides the opportunity for a student to organize various activities within the university where they will be fully supported, which allows you to pursue something. If you have a project come up, you can leave, you can reach an agreement with the university, and instead they'll say, "That's so cool, it's great that you're doing this," and they'll definitely meet you halfway.
That's great.
While that represents one perspective, we must also acknowledge that the university has clear and specific legal obligations. And I'll be honest about what sold me, why I decided to apply to the conservatory, because when I read their curriculum, and curriculum is the course description, basically what you've enrolled in, what's ahead of you. And it was clearly written right there in black and white that the conservatory is strictly obliged to provide every directing student. Keep in mind, it is a rigorous 2-year graduate program. So they must provide to the graduate student, to this specific person, at least one full production per year. Honestly, having that guaranteed opportunity was exactly what sold me on the program. Because I went there for the practice, I went to study the American school through practice, what it is, how it all works, and how to stage plays in that school. And I must say that in my conservatory in Cincinnati, there's a very good theater. It's wealthy, it has sponsors who work and provide funding, and it's a real theater with 2 halls, a small one and a large one. And there were productions, an orchestra played, everything was there, there were sets. It was like working in a professional theater, working with a designer. I had the chance to work with a costume designer and other creative staff and so on. That was really the main thing for me and why I applied in the first place. It was because the set of subjects was quite specific. Again, since I was in a graduate program, I didn't have a very large pool of theoretical subjects, which made this particular program stand out compared to others. Because if you enter a master's program, for example, or a bachelor's program, especially the very first level, there will be a lot of theory and maybe less practice. But that's right, it's the same in our conservatory. But if it's a graduate program, there will be far fewer theoretical disciplines and much more practice. I did several projects there, in addition to the 2 plays I staged, and I'm very grateful to the conservatory for those projects because they helped me work on my dissertation, on my future doctorate, and so on in a practical sense. While teaching there, I also had the chance to lead a specialized opera class. Well, that's basically the same thing I did at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, that is, working with an actor on stage. And I really value the opera class curriculum as a subject and as an artistic, collaborative practice. I love working there because I believe you can workshop and refine a wide variety of creative material, which you can then stage as complete, full-fledged professional productions. And it was a truly fascinating and rewarding experience for me. That is the most significant difference. It is that there is an incredible amount of freedom. You can choose your own projects, and the university has very specific and clearly defined obligations. If those requirements are not met, well, you have the right to hold the university accountable, and they will be held responsible and answer for it. Right? And again, for me, that was the main thing that I bought into. I was just a very mature student, so maybe my case isn't quite typical. Because I didn't need to sit through lectures, I knew my profession, I didn't need to do all that. Right? And I'm very grateful to the teachers who said, look, why bother? Don't go. Listen, you know it all. Don't come here. Go somewhere and do something, some projects. Now, I can hardly even imagine that in our conservatory. It is truly hard to believe. And it is also worth mentioning that back when I was finally graduating from our music conservatory, when we raised the issue, these poor, miserable students raised the question of how are we going to do our thesis project? We somehow need to stage a graduation play. They told us, well, you won't. Nobody needs you. Get out of here. That's roughly how it was. And these were the people who had taught us for 5 years before that. That is exactly right. That moment had a very profound and lasting impact on me. I remember every detail of it very well. It happened many years ago now, but I still remember it all very clearly. And I remember the people who told me that just as well.
I think we all, probably, or most of us at least, have quite a few such personal stories in our own experience that are directly related to the system of Russian education.
Maybe just one last thing to mention. I really believe the general attitude towards students plays a significant role here. Again, you can truly feel it all from the very start. Because in our current educational system, again, I'm only talking about creative universities. I haven't studied anywhere else. I don't have that experience. So here, a student enters a creative university and is seen as bad from the start, but in America, they're seen as good. You see, in Russia, they're seen as untalented from the start, and they're told that. If you ask me to count how many times I was told in the conservatory that I was untalented, that I'd never achieve anything in the profession, I'd never work because I'm not capable. If I took $1 for every word, I would be rich.
But it really starts right from the beginning, with how people are just encouraged as they grow up. I even see it, for example, in the reactions at some local concerts, amateur concerts, right? People are fully supported, even if it is clearly evident that, there is still a lot of hard work for the person to do on their vocals or performing arts. But people still choose to encourage their performance because they truly want to support exactly what they have achieved so far, no matter what percentage that is of the final result, but they encourage that specific percentage. Even if that number is just a 5 out of every 100.
Right? I can testify that it's true. 100%.
That is true, whereas we tend to look for imperfections instead. Well, it's probably linked to our upbringing.
I think it's something that's really deep-seated like that,
Yes. So you have completed your academic studies. Did they teach you the same types of subjects as you had back in Russia? Or was it more like a graduate school environment where they didn't really do much formal teaching?
Back then there actually weren't any of those music history or opera history classes available and so on. That kind of theory was no longer there. There were actually some very interesting and deeply complex theoretical subjects involved. Well, theoretical in quotes, let's say, because it was all geared toward practice. So they taught us acting skills, and for acting, I studied for 2 years. One teacher taught the first year and another the second. The first year had more theory. I'm very grateful. He was a colleague of mine. We worked together later. We actually put on a full play there. He was truly wonderful at teaching us, not just about when this or that famous theater figure like Stanislavski or Chekhov was born, studied, married, or baptized, but he taught us the soul of the craft as well. However, he taught the fundamental core principles of those theories in a very concise way. And naturally, knowing about Stanislavski and Chekhov is one thing. But for example, I picked up on some modern American trends while I was staying there. Acting schools and methods that I didn't know about and had never even heard of. Not to mention that you can learn directly from their truly great American masters like Adler, Strasberg, and Meisner. I mean, these are the people who actually worked and taught there. So naturally, they really know them and their methods very well. Then in the second year, it was all about practice. We performed so many things. We did the works of Chekhov, Shakespeare, and basically the whole solid classic theatrical repertoire. It was really great because the teacher was a practitioner and I had certain theoretical subjects there, meaning, for example, I started learning the Italian language. I'm also very grateful to the professor who was living in Rome and tried his absolute best to teach us from there. On Zoom, yes. And well, you surely know how the daily schedule and the entire pool of academic subjects are typically formed in an American academy. There's this truly wonderful individual known as an advisor, and they have to, well, a counselor, I guess, as you might say, and they have to advise you. Literally, you go to them and they suggest which subjects to take to get your diploma. Because honestly, it's not like you just have to study only these specific subjects, There's a mandatory part, yes, and then there are subjects that you can choose. For example, they ask you which language you want to learn, right? And it's the same, this system, it's very flexible. So, for example, I studied Italian there for 1 year, and then they told me that's it, the program doesn't allow more. I'm like, what? I want a second year. And they met me halfway. And I literally squeezed into some other group and sat there for a second year studying it. Great. So, I mean, this system is very flexible, and this flexibility, it works. It really works. Yeah, I had a lot of practice. Like I said, I had 2 productions. These hours were included in your schedule. So it's not a situation where you come and spend your own time there in the morning or at night. These are hours that are included in your academic schedule, and you do this within your own schedule. It's really great because it's not like that for us. Our system doesn't work that way. And how does it work for us? Well, for us, it works like this. Well, I'll only speak about directing, right? What I know about. So it means that you are required to stage one scene with actors at least once every 6 months. Where to get the actors, nobody knows. That's how the conservatory works. Well, go find them yourself, since no one really cares. So no one pays them, or rather they pay them such pennies that it's better not to pay at all, really. That is right. I understand. So that's also how it is somehow. And they don't get any credit for practice hours, but it could be a fair trade, right? They sing for us, and it counts as a subject for them. That's how it is in America, for example, not here. No one really gives a damn about them either. So when exactly are you supposed to rehearse with them? Well, in your free time. And where? Yeah. Where exactly? Nobody really knows. It's like, go find yourself a classroom somewhere. They won't give you a room because rooms are only for the teachers. So that is basically how the whole thing works. Unfortunately, it simply doesn't work. And there it's just a kind of self-organization of people, just spontaneous self-organization. And then you come into a system where everything is organized for you from the start, and you start thinking, what do I do? Can I just study in peace? Is that even possible to work like this? I don't have to look for a room? Again, I'm not saying we didn't look for rooms. I was doing my project there as part of a course. I just wanted to get as much practice as possible, and they told me, well, go there, there's an opportunity like that in this course. So I went there. So I was recently preparing a project and working with several actors. I found myself, they were actually all my classmates from my school. Well, it's like a practical part of my dissertation. And we went around looking for available rooms, rehearsing in empty classrooms, but it was all based on pure enthusiasm. But as they say, if you don't really want to, then don't do it. It's not in your academic syllabus. It's not a situation where you're required to submit, but no one knows exactly how you'll prepare it, right? So it's survival of the fittest, right? Of course, I don't even know if it's the fittest who survive. It's more like, based on random luck, completely random. So that was a very unique experience. Then, after I finished my first year of studies, a big festival came up in a theater in St. Petersburg. And I went there to perform during my summer break, but I needed to come back 2 weeks late for the term. I told them I was doing a festival, actually bringing the Russian premiere of a Jake Heggie opera. They told me, go ahead and do the festival and come back at whatever time you need to. And everyone turned a blind eye to it because at the university, but this university functions by university rules. You're not actually allowed to do that. But again, they know how to, and you have to respect the American Academy for this. They know how to treat you well. That is correct.
To make it good for the student.
They know how to do that.
Well, yeah, I think they really just focus on the ultimate end goal. After all, when you think about it, why exactly do they educate a person in the first place, right? Yeah, it is so that you eventually become a great director, a successful one. And if there is a perfect opportunity, yeah, to work on a specific project that will significantly help your career, then that should definitely be the main priority.
Yes, that's right.
Instead of simply finishing your studies, getting a diploma, and saying your final goodbyes. Well, I also know that in the American education system, the moment you have officially graduated, you basically become part of this expansive and supportive university family. And you can always go back there at any time, like to sit in the library. There are always various alumni events happening, or former students are invited back to give guest lectures or to meet with the new generation of young students. And I think that's a really great thing. Unfortunately, it's just not like that for us. For example, I graduated from the Moscow State Conservatory, and now they won't even let me pass through the doors. Mainly due to security reasons, I can't simply walk right into the building and go to a classroom to practice, or just take a class to do some singing. I don't have the right to do that because once your work here is finished, you're an outsider. Yeah, it's the same for me. Yes. And in that specific sense, it is truly great to be there because you are always within a supportive circle where people are on the exact same wavelength, and you can work to create something truly remarkable together later on. Because ultimately, you can be an incredibly talented individual, but if you do not have a dedicated team that thinks just like you do, it is hard. However, as they often say, when you have passionate people around you who are perfectly in step with you, you can truly move mountains and achieve anything.
I am in complete agreement.
And that's probably what is truly missing in our current education system today. It is this vital sense of connection, real, meaningful connections, and the act of building professional networks specifically within your chosen industry, which students often have to navigate on their own after they graduate.
Our networking is actually truly remarkable. It's just not exactly that kind of thing.
But they're not the same. They work differently. Yeah, it's all just different.
Not the kind of connections that should really work in this current industry. After graduating from the American Conservatory, all the various teachers who taught my core subjects, I simply put them on my professional resume as references. This is because those are the important professional connections that are built in a healthy way. Even though I had some very major disagreements with some of them during my years of studies. I can't say that we ended our relationship on peaceful or wonderful terms. No, that is really not the case at all. So, I probably will not be writing to those people to wish them a happy birthday. But I do know for a fact that if work references are ever needed, they will certainly say that I am fully capable of working. Yes, I can definitely work.
So now that you've graduated, what do the prospects look like in America or over in Russia?
Well, this is exactly where such a truly wonderful and remarkable story finally comes to an end, and a brand new story begins that is, well, essentially the same across two different continents. None of it changes. Because you see, you spend all your time studying so hard, but absolutely nobody knows who you are for the most part, which is quite a strange thing to experience when you think about it deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you go to work after that? And this is where, first of all, the difference between directors and singers, conductors and accompanists begins. For example, conductors and accompanists, they can join a theater's staff. You know that in America there are no repertory theaters. But in terms of, say, the chorus accompanists, coaches, and some staff conductors, these positions do exist on staff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is true. For singers, with all my great respect for them and love, it is actually much easier for them to find work than for us. It is simply not even comparable in any way.
That is actually quite interesting.
Because, well, you understand that a play is being staged, 10 people sing, and one person directs the whole thing.
Well, that is very clear, of course. Yes, yes, yes. And then you just open your mouth, basically, and, well, you show your voice in the end.
Exactly right.
Yes, and directing is always subtle there and so on.
Yes, there are many competitions in America, like summer programs. It's very popular. These various festivals, summer ones, they exist for directors too. You can apply there. And that's how I, for example, found work. I applied there and was invited to direct.
Uh-huh. I've got it now.
So, I mean, it is certainly possible, but it is just one way or another you have to work from project to project. And the university itself doesn't really guarantee you any long-term employment. And all the various recommendations that your teachers can give you, well, it is more of a personal matter. Almost like a special favor that teachers do for you, that teachers do. That is, the university has no obligation for job placement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know if it is bad or good. I won't judge here. It is just that it wasn't in Russia and it wasn't in America either. I mean, you go out into the street, you go out with some kind of emotional baggage, but you equally go out into the middle of nowhere. That is it. They're happy to see you, lovely and genuinely sweet, later at the university, but if you ask where to work, they'll just shrug their shoulders. Right. If you're a foreigner in this country, it all gets a million times more complicated simply because of your legal status and some issues that are simply related to legal residency. But even that doesn't really depend on that. It's not a matter of foreigners versus citizens. So, where you can get a job as a professional assistant is in some large estate or a major theater venue. Well, for example, graduates from my conservatory work at the Metropolitan Opera. They're there working as assistants for some big shot directors. My teacher asked me if she should help get me in there, but I just looked at her and said, "Oh, no, thank you, I'm fine." I said that because I just don't feel like I need that kind of thing right now. You know what I mean? Or you have to look for some projects, meaning constantly looking for projects. Well, let me say it again for the audience. Back when I was finally finishing up at the Music Conservatory, I actually got a full list from Wikipedia of every single opera house in the entire United States. And I wrote to them. I'm not joking at all. I'm being totally serious here. I wrote a personal letter to every single theater on that long alphabetical list. In the end, I got a response, just a simple reply, from maybe only 5% of them. Those were the people who at least said something, and out of those, 3 people told me, "Your resume is just absolutely fantastic. But unfortunately, we can't hire you right now because either everything is already booked 5 years out, 5 seasons ahead, or we simply do not have the budget available for you." That's what some small regional theaters wrote. Or we don't want to because you're a foreigner. Like, we don't want the hassle with legal status. With legal status, we're not going to deal with those issues.
I should probably make a quick side note for those who don't know. In the States, if you're there on a student visa, you're not allowed to work. In many cases, you can only work very little, and even then it's strictly restricted to your own campus, meaning you're confined within the campus grounds. Furthermore, if a professional theater wants to hire you, they are required to go through the complex process of filing a formal petition on your behalf. which essentially means they have to sponsor your visa. They also have to prove, and this is a common requirement in Europe as well, they must provide evidence that your skills are significantly better than those of the local directors currently on the market. And that is exactly why theaters just will not take it on. Yes, that's the difficulty.
And that's the real stumbling block, because it's not actually hard for them to pay the money. I mean, they can just deduct it from my fee.
That is correct. It really is not that much at all.
But because they have to prove they want you instead of an American, absolutely nobody wants to do that. This is because they're the ones who have to deal with all the complex immigration paperwork, not you.
Yes, that is exactly what I mean.
So it's a vicious circle in a certain sense that keeps repeating. Anyway, I had a very big project right after I graduated from my university. I was working completely legally and officially. There's a post-graduation program where you can work legally for a full year after graduating, but it is strictly limited to just that 1 year. So it was a very big festival in San Diego called Opera Neo, who's doing a very interesting project. And we, for example, I staged the American premiere of Porpora's opera, Nicola Porpora's Polifemo. That was a very high-profile project. Everything was great, wonderful, wealthy sponsors. We worked and then it was over. All right then. So I guess that is exactly how things are going to be. And you're in a constant search for projects, a constant search for work. Well, or you have to organize something of your own, but it works the same way for us. To be completely honest with you, of course, in terms of employment specifically, I really don't see much of a significant difference between Russia and America when it comes to my own profession, for example.
Well, for us, it's probably entirely possible, say, if you already happen to know someone, then you can actually secure a position on staff in less than 5 years. In the United States, as we previously discussed, there is a system that you simply cannot bypass. If a person is already established there, especially if they are a member of the so-called union, and if you are in it, then the theater is simply unable to ever fire you. And that's also a problem. But on the other hand, you're protected. No one can fire you without a really, super valid reason. But it turns out that talented young professionals and university graduates are finding it nearly impossible to secure any employment, because the current employees in those roles stay in those positions until the very end.
And I want to say that my singer colleagues, for example, and their, well, the Cincinnati Conservatory is to a certain extent a unique place for people who are at the top level. And these are voices that, well, they are very rare voices, and they are all sitting there wondering exactly how much time has passed. Well, how long has it been? 2 years? A year has passed, right, since we graduated, just 1 year. They are all sitting in these various apprentice programs. Yes, so these are specific programs, even if you are on the permanent staff somewhere in some theater. These are covers, you do not go on stage, you're an understudy during rehearsals, and you sing at some smaller concerts, or some, well, what is commonly called morje over in Russia. I really quite hate that specific word, but nevertheless, there are some small, such minor parts, yes. So, and then you, with your incredible voice and your immense talent, are sitting there just like that. Until that union ends, until that person retires from their position, or until they move away to another theater, and that spot opens up, and even then it's not a given that they'll take you.
Yes.
Because after all, once again, absolutely nobody has cancelled the human factor. No one has cancelled the human factor.
And the same kind of people live in America as in Russia.
And well, again, we might hit it off or we might not. That's normal. We're all human beings. So I just want to warn our listeners and viewers against a certain bias. We've kind of spoken poorly about Russia and well about America. Yes, that is true. In a wide variety of different ways, this system is actually better than the Russian one, but it is still not perfect. It is run by people who are responsible for calling the shots. And it is just as much about personal taste, exactly the same. It just operates under a set of slightly different rules. And for example, you know very well that in the professional opera world, we have this sort of unspoken collaboration in America called the American Giants. These are the influential people who drive the entire industry, our own contemporaries. There are famous composers like Jake Heggie or Gregory Spears, some really big names, and talented directors too, even my own teacher from the conservatory where I studied, a true master of the craft. And these are the people who make the decisions.
Now imagine if you have a poor relationship with them. Would you be able to have a successful career then or not?
So I would put it like this. It is the exact same concept. It just operates in a slightly different manner. Those levers you mentioned, those strings you can pull, they're different, but they definitely still exist.
But they still exist? Yes, exactly.
There is quite a lot there that is, well, as you know, being swept under the rug. In our country, nobody even attempts to sweep it under the rug. It is my friend, my brother, or my cousin, and it all works so smoothly and wonderfully. But over there, they still hide it under the rug. You can't do that because you could be sued, or the public could get involved, or the press, and people would think very poorly of you.
Yes, but for example, paying a teacher on the admissions committee to get into a university is simply impossible in the United States.
That is simply completely impossible.
But if you take private lessons and study with that teacher privately in advance, and that teacher happens to be on the committee, then of course they can influence the final outcome with their word or their vote. Although again, they are not permitted to vote for you in that case. If it is widely known that you are their student, they do not have a vote. However, they still maintain professional relationships with their colleagues. And those colleagues know that you are their student and that you would very much like for them to be accepted.
In America, that connection you were talking about, in America, that connection is absolutely everything. In other words, it is about professional ties with people you know personally. On one hand, it is very good because they can say, I have worked with them and they are truly great at what they do. On the other hand, it is actually quite a negative and difficult situation because it significantly restricts the entire available pool of potential candidates. But we are probably talking about the fact that we stand for the fundamental principle of open and fair competition. And we are probably just, well, a group of crazy people, though I really do not know for sure. When I hire actors for the theater, I announce an open casting call, and people I don't know at all come to me. And then, when people I do know come, they say, they told me at Theater N that, first of all, you won't be listening yourself. I say, how do they know me at Theater N? I have never even been there before. And secondly, that you've already hired everyone, well, like from your own people, actors. I say, me? No, I'm sitting here listening myself, as you can see. You're crazy, of course, probably. In America, this is impossible. That is, the system of closed auditions, it functions very well there, both for closed ones and for our position. Yes, because I'd rather call Mr. Jones and ask which director I should hire rather than simply hold an open casting call and say, guys, send in your creative portfolios and we'll pick the best ones. That is a bad approach.
Yes, that is correct.
Well, let's just imagine that we didn't get along with someone, but we're all human, right? There's no right or wrong here. It's life, our ordinary life. What are you talking about? For example, I didn't have a good relationship with the artistic director of the Cincinnati Opera because after seeing my production of Fellow Travelers by Spears, he said he really did not like the show. So what can I honestly do about it? Well, he just does not like it. You absolutely have a right to feel that way, but as long as he is still there, he will never invite me to work at that theater. So that's how it works.
Well, nothing can be done, yes.
There is nothing to do. What should I do then? Restage the entire play just so everyone likes it? Well, that is really getting into the realm of, making some kind of moral choice.
And how do you assess and evaluate the significant role of independent creative projects and festivals in the US and Russia?
In the United States, it is a very common thing to see. People are often really eager to get involved and find a way to get in there. These projects sometimes have access to great funding, and they can often get a lot of good press. Well, the press is a separate conversation entirely, but nevertheless, some of them do get good press, and it can eventually become a springboard of sorts for their future success. Or if it didn't become a springboard, first of all, we don't know when it'll pay off. Maybe in 5 years, it's a long-term investment. The long-term investment industry, it can be a very impressive and solid line on a resume. In Russia, it does not really work at all. That is, well, I would say they simply do not exist there at all. And what does exist is organized by crazy people like you and me, who usually bring their experience from abroad because we really want it to work in our own country as well. And people from the industry, local ones, I mean, they actively fight it tooth and nail, shouting, "No, no, we don't need this." As for why this is happening, it remains entirely unclear. It is either that what is currently available, and I will not mention any specific names right now, but what is available is a product of truly appalling quality. It is just absolutely appalling. I honestly just do not know why this is the case. To be honest, I think, it is really great because, first of all, it's an opportunity to work with different people. It's an excellent opportunity to expand your valuable professional network. That is exactly it. It's an opportunity to stage for us directors, for example, a lot of different things in unique styles that you have never even thought about before. It's an excellent opportunity to connect with your audience because it's held in many various states and many different people go there. In general, the target audience is very diverse. On the other hand, these are fairly exclusive clubs because advertising is incredibly expensive everywhere in America, especially in America because, well, it is 100% commercialized, right? It is almost like a private club, so it is quite difficult to gather, well, a completely random and spontaneous audience. This makes it a challenge to bring together a truly diverse and varied group of people that will come, see it, and be amazed. It's either people connected to sponsors in some way, acquaintances, friends, friends of friends, or maybe it's just some tourists who happen to wander in. That kind of thing sometimes happens too. Those festivals have their own problems, I would put it that way. But the idea itself is actually great. I really like it a lot. It does not tie you down to one specific place.
And what's the approach, for instance, since you run your own theater in St. Petersburg? So, how do you specifically go about the process of attracting an audience to your work in Russia? And how is it different? Well, we just, briefly touched upon this a little bit earlier in our conversation. Yes, what's the difference, like a really fundamental difference that sets it apart?
For some reason, there is this particular opinion in Russia right now. Just recently, literally the other day, I read that someone in a position of power stated that theater tickets have somehow become quite expensive. It is not entirely clear why this is the case, but they suggested that these tickets should be made more affordable. Well, that's not just the opinion of one person, it's the opinion of basically a very large percentage of our Russian audience. People, for some completely unknown reasons, perhaps it is the old Soviet legacy, or maybe it is just the mentality and so on. They firmly believe that theater tickets should cost very little money, but the quality should be exceptionally good. Well, let us at least try to tell our audience about this, that it doesn't work that way. It's a myth. If the quality is high, the tickets will be very expensive. Well, now we could discuss that particular topic for a long time too. For us, if we're talking specifically about our audience engagement policy, we rely, and our theater relies, on two main and fundamental pillars. To begin with, we are a commercial theater, and we do not offer low-priced or discounted tickets. Because we are an independent theater and we maintain an exceptionally high standard of quality. At the very least, we constantly strive and work hard for it to remain that way. We strive to evolve constantly, never standing still or remaining static. We are not a traditional repertory theater. I might keep a single production running for a full season as long as people keep coming. But then even if it's sold out, I'll pull it because we need to keep constantly moving forward with fresh and new things in the repertoire. So in order for all of this to actually happen, we really need to be consistently making money.
Well, what does quality actually mean, though? It's also very subjective.
In order to answer your question, I'll go ahead and explain the second principle of how the theater works regarding the audience. That will be the answer to your question. We work in our own unique style. You mentioned the mission at the very start of our talk, and I couldn't agree more with what you said. I have nothing further to add. I truly believe every theater should have its own specific mission, and the entire audience base should gradually coalesce around that mission. In our theater, in addition to having a very specific repertoire policy, we bring in rare operas and we always work with American classical music. That's how it's always been and will be. And besides that, We also have a comprehensive conceptual policy in place. I'm a Brechtian director. I stage productions in that style. I believe that a theater must have its own dedicated audience. A theater simply cannot be everything for everyone. And when we talk about a high-quality production, we don't pursue just any audience member who happens to walk in, trying to force them in by any means necessary just to have them sit there and not move. And then people start saying, what kind of nonsense did they just show me? So a truly high-quality product is one made at an exceptionally high professional level, by skilled and dedicated professional people. Absolutely, and it is something that, if we are discussing the world of theater, must possess its own unique concept, a very clear one. And people go there specifically for that concept. It is always the concept that comes first. As a director, I have realized for certain, after having studied the traditional Russian school and then the American school of thought, I've realized for myself that it's concept first. So if someone is not a fan of the product the theater is currently putting on stage, that's great. It just means it's not your theater. You should go to a place where the work is different.
Yes, it does not mean that it is low quality. Yes, it is just not for you.
And I think that if we have a cluster of theaters where each one has its own distinct and special concept, the audience will have a choice. While some go to academic productions, some lean to avant-garde, some to realism, some to symbolism after all, and why not? Let's have a diverse choice. It's truly great.
And very often, for example, if we are talking about the world of modern art, modern opera and theater, an artist must be, first of all, a multi-genre creator, and they must also be what we call doubly professional in their work.
Nowadays, yes. In our time, yes.
And quite often, I have personally had this experience several times when I saw some, well, let us say, avant-garde things performed by a non-professional, because it really seems that you can easily hide your technical flaws here. For example, if we're talking about the voice, it's just some set of sounds. Then an ordinary, unsophisticated viewer is just bored, they don't understand it, and so on. However, if you take a truly seasoned professional, someone who possesses an absolutely superb vocal technique combined with exceptional performance skills and total artistic mastery, then you simply cannot help but be captivated by it. I have personally witnessed such remarkable examples on several different occasions already. The issue is just that quite often these high-level professionals choose not to engage in the world of modern performance and instead decide to go into the traditional classical repertoire, which is a field that theaters are already simply overcrowded with to the point of saturation. Because of this situation, the audience is steadily getting older and older.
It is indeed a complex tangle of various problems, yes. And once again, if we are talking about the two countries that we are currently discussing, these involve different underlying mechanisms for these problems, but the very same issues arise simply because of these different mechanisms at play.
Plus, the classical repertoire, yes, you've learned it. It can be useful to you several times in your life. You can sing in different theaters. If it's a major world premiere, well, maybe you dedicated a full 6 months to study it, to perform it exceptionally well, and maybe you'll never perform it again.
Yes, then there's also this recurring narrative. They often say, yes, why do we have the same thing in the theater? Let's have something entirely new.
And for something entirely new, it unfortunately costs money. Yes, people just do not always understand. The costs are huge, huge. And yes, for those who don't know, who haven't been involved in any production or organizational activities, then ticket sales don't even cover, I would say, roughly 5% of the total production costs. And we are not even talking about the actual salaries for the team yet. This is just like direct cost, direct expenses like the hall rental, the full orchestra, and well, the artists, of course, must all be paid. If it is a theater production, then you can easily double the entire budget. And so when you come for 300 rubles to a concert, or even for 3,000 rubles, well, to be honest, in Russia at least, yes, the vast majority of different organizations, they rely heavily on state grants. Yes, so it is important that you have to understand this situation. Actually, your ticket doesn't cost 3,000 rubles, but 20, and the other 17,000 rubles were covered by the state for you.
I really love this example. It's great that you brought it up because here people really don't understand this. In America, they don't understand it either.
In America, it's the same.
And again, those like $30 that you paid, another $300 was paid by a sponsor. There's an institution of sponsorship, something that's not developed here at all. It's different for them. Their state isn't involved, but sponsors are, but they pay those missing amounts just the same. What difference does it make who pays them? If someone pays them, well, besides the viewer, right? So all this talk about self-sufficiency is just such a, amateurish, beautiful.
This is complete and absolute amateurism. Yes, yes, yes.
The naivety, like, let's only keep those theaters that will pay for themselves. Dear viewers, you simply won't have any theaters left then. The Mariinsky Theater and the Bolshoi would close just 15 minutes after that. Because for some reason, people think that, well, the big opera houses, they're so self-sufficient. They pay for themselves entirely. They're just so, well, incredibly stable. I'd like to calculate the number of minutes until the moment these theaters would cease to exist, when their subsidies are cut off. We'll still manage to stay afloat somehow, because we're used to living without subsidies.